Ronan's 16-year-old was walking home when two teens attacked him after mistaking him for someone else. 16-year-old Ronan Kanda had just finished his GCSE exams and he was described as kind, funny, and respectful. He loved football, video games, and spending time with his friends. On January 29th of 2022 in Wolverhampton, UK, Ronan went to a friend's house to purchase a PlayStation controller for only £5. After hanging out for a little while, he decides to walk back home, completely unaware that there are two teenage boys nearby with deadly weapons. Those two teenage boys were Prabjit Vadesa and Sukhman Shergill. Earlier that day, Prabjit went to a post office to collect a ninja sword set and a large machete that he had bought online for only £17. It was also discovered that he had bought other blades online using a fake ID. On that day, those teens were looking for a specific person who owed them money. But because Ronan had a similar hairstyle and similar clothing, they mistook him for the person that they were targeting. Ronan had absolutely nothing to do with the conflict. As Ronan was walking down his own street just seconds away from his front door, those teens ran up behind him. One of them was carrying the ninja sword while the other one carried the machete. Ronan was attacked so violently that neighbors could hear him screaming and ran outside. He was rushed to the hospital, but sadly he did not survive because the blade had pierced his heart. Once locals found out what happened to Ronan, they were terrified because he was completely innocent. He wasn't involved in gangs, violence, or any kind of criminal activity at all. Ronan was simply a normal 16-year-old boy who enjoyed being with his friends and playing video games. After Ronan's death, his mother started campaigning for stricter laws regarding dangerous weapons being sold online. Her campaign eventually helped inspire what is known now as Ronan's Law. In 2023, Prabjit was sentenced to a minimum of 18 years in prison and Sukhman was sentenced to a minimum of 16 years.
When you think of a spa, you surely think of massages, relaxation, a good time, not a massacre. It was tea time on the 16th of March 2011. All over Atlanta, families were sitting down for their evening meal. Then a terrifying call came into the police. It came from a place called Young's Asian Massage Parlor, and the report was that 4 dead bodies were lying on the floor. Police raced over there thinking what the hell could have happened. Then miraculously found that amongst the bodies scattered on the floor, one man was still breathing. He was raced to the hospital and thankfully did survive. It turned out that Delana Gonzalez was shot as she was hiding in the corner of the room. Now, her husband was also there at the same time, but he only survived because he was receiving a service in a different room. Before police even had time to gather their thoughts and work out what the hell had gone on here, another call came in. Another massage parlor, and this time a woman cowering on the floor begging police to get there. So police grabbed their stuff and they raced over to the next massage parlor. This one was Gold Spa, around 30 miles away, and honestly when they got there they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Another 3 women lay dead on the floor. The terrified member of staff explained that a random white guy had burst in and opened fire. But you won't believe what happened next, because another phone call. Aromatherapy spa just down the road, and this time another dead body. This was horrifying. These officers had never seen anything like it. How the hell were there so many victims, and why all at massage parlors? They knew they had to act quick before this spree killer could basically take any more victims. In less than 2 hours, 8 people were already dead. They got a description of this white guy and immediately got onto the CCTV to try and get an image of what he looked like. So they blasted this grainy CCTV all over the news, all over social media, and then a very unexpected call came in. The person on the end of the line was like, yeah, I know that guy. He's called Robert Long, and the reason why I know him is because it's my son. The parents were like, we've got his location data if you want it, here you go, and fair play to the dad for doing this. It didn't take long for police to race after him, thankfully, and track him down. But that wasn't before they got into like a massive, dramatic car chase. Eventually, they literally had to ram him off the road. They arrested him and tried to start working out what the hell could be his motive. Why had he done this? Now, they hazarded a guess that this was potentially a hate crime because 7 out of 8 victims were female and 6 were Asian. So police were understandably like, this feels like a racially motivated attack. But Robert had kind of a different story to tell. He was like, I've got an S addiction and basically I wanted to just remove any potential temptation. He was also like, yeah, I wanted to punish those in the S industry. Now, although it sounded wild, his parents did back up this theory. They did say that he was addicted to watching corn videos at home. That was kind of all he would ever do. They said they actually had to kick him out and send him to rehab for this. Obviously, he was charged with the murders, but because of the different areas that the crimes took place in, it was quite a complex process. In the end, he was given 4 life sentences plus 35 years for 4 of the murders. But the other half, plus terrorism charges, hate crime charges, are all still TBC. It's basically just got to be decided whether he either rots in prison or is given the death penalty. Now, I don't know what you guys think, but personally, I kind of feel like the death penalty is sometimes the easy way out. His victims were somebody's mum, somebody's daughter, someone's brother. One of the victim's sons said, "I miss all those things we took for granted when she was here."
What started off as a normal night out ended in one of Aberdeen's most violent, sadistic, horrifying murders. He got into a car which he thought was a taxi, but instead of being taken home, he was taken to his depraved death. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the torture and murder of Dean Jamieson. 30-year-old Dean was a married father of 4 living in Kenmare, Aberdeenshire. He was described as someone who loved to have a good time, and he was a typical Scottish Jack the Lad. In April 2006, Dean had been out for some drinks in Aberdeen when he decided to make his way back home between 9 and 10 p.m. He was incredibly intoxicated, and when the bouncers started turning him away at the doors of the pubs and the clubs, he knew that his night was over and he needed to get back home. He would flag down what he thought was a taxi and climbed into the car. Unbeknownst to Dean, however, he was now in a vehicle with 3 monsters. Colin Cowie, who was 22, Kevin Leslie, who was 24, and Sean Patton, who was 20, were all known to the police. On that evening, they were driving about in Colin's car, sort of acting like an unlicensed taxi service, picking up strangers and taking them home in exchange for cash. They picked up Dean and he agreed to pay the £30 taxi fare. However, at one point, Colin turned around and demanded that Dean pay him up front, to which Dean said, "No, I'll pay you when you take us home." And upon this refusal, something switched in Colin. The men would divert to, I believe, Sean's house, where they collected a knife and proceeded to do the unthinkable. Dean was driven to a secluded area where, with a knife held to his throat, he was robbed. All 3 of the men were rummaging through his pockets, pulling everything out that they could and taking it. Dean had a watch snatched off of his wrist along with a bracelet/wristband. His ring was stolen along with a tobacco tin and a lump of cash. When they arrived to a remote track near Elric Hill, Dean was dragged out of the car and forced to strip before being barbarically beaten. Despite him being held at knife point, Dean tried to escape, and he managed. He started running away from his attackers, but being drunk and disoriented and frightened for his life, he would lose his balance and fell. And that is when they pounced on him. The 3 men began to brutally beat Dean. He was repeatedly punched, kicked and stamped on. He was struck so violently and with so much force that his skull was chipped. He was slashed and stabbed with a knife and another sharp object. He sustained 3 gaping wounds to his head along with vertical slashes on his legs. Just to make it that tiny bit more worse, to make these men even more evil, they video recorded some of the attack and took photos of it. All the while, Dean was pleading with them to please just allow him to go home to his wife and children. After inflicting this barbaric torture on an innocent stranger, Colin, Kevin and Sean all got back in the car and left Dean behind. Left him clinging onto life in critical condition in the freezing cold. Dean Jamieson would succumb to his injuries, dying from blood loss and hypothermia. His body would be discovered the following day by a dog walker. Police launched their investigation into what happened to Dean and who was responsible, and it would actually be a community police officer who helped crack the case. The men revelled in what they did. They thought they were big and clever and invincible, and they started bragging, gloating about what they had done. They told friends and family that they had killed a man, and they even showed some of them photos and videos of the attack. Soon, a PCSO would catch wind of these rumours and gave police a line to investigate. Blood that was identified as Dean's was discovered inside of Colin's car and on clothing belonging to Kevin and Sean. It was said that after the attack, the men were dripping in Dean's blood. They would all be arrested and charged for Dean's murder, and immediately they all turned on one another. In November 2006, Colin Cowie and Kevin Leslie would both be convicted of the murder of Dean Jamieson. They both received life sentences with minimum terms of 18 and 20 years to serve. Sean Patton would be convicted of the lesser charge of culpable homicide, and for this he was handed a 10-year sentence. After serving 6 years, he was released, and it is reported that he has been in and out of prison since, for violent crime, including robbing someone at knife point and threatening to kill a fairground worker.
For the longest time, they thought it was a ghost, but it was literally someone living in their walls in their house. Daniel LaPlante was born in Townsend, Massachusetts, and his upbringing was tough, to say the least. He suffered SA from a very young age, not only at the hands of his father, but also stepfather, and later on as a teenager by his own psychiatrist. He lived in a house with his mother and his stepfather, but he was primarily raised by the mom, although not really though, because his entire childhood he was severely neglected. His mom just quite literally did not care. The house he grew up in was filthy. He didn't really shower often, so he was always a little bit smelly, and he was known to be unhygienic, and because of that, people later on in high school bullied him often. Students at his high school, but also people in the neighborhood, described him to be odd and kind of a loner. He just preferred to spend his time alone, probably because people were not very nice to him very often, so oftentimes he would walk outside and go to the woods behind his house, and he would hang out in the woods by himself for hours. While he was in high school, he found out that he was dyslexic, and shortly after, he was also diagnosed with hyperactivity disorder. By 15 years old, Daniel was acting out, and he began breaking into people's houses, and he had this thing for scaring people. He liked to scare people. He got like a rush of adrenaline when people feared him, so he began breaking into people's houses, and at first he would only break in to steal valuables, but then it turned into him either leaving things behind or moving furniture around because he liked to install fear in people. It just kept escalating, and then in 1986, he met a 15-year-old girl named Tina Bowen. Tina lived at home with her sister and her father, Frank. The family had just very recently lost their mother to cancer, so they were coping through that loss, and her father began working longer hours at work because he needed to provide for the family. One day, Tina and her sister were home alone. When the house phone rang, they answered, and the boy on the other line said that his name was Daniel and that he was calling for Tina because he had gotten her phone number from a mutual friend, and Tina was giddy. She was a teenage girl. She was like, oh my goodness, this boy has a crush on me. He thinks that I'm cute. This is so fun and exciting. What she did not know was that Daniel had not gotten her phone number from a mutual friend. He had actually previously broken into the Bowens house, and while he was inside, he was looking through the family pictures. He saw Tina. He thought that she was really pretty, somehow got the house phone number, and then began calling her because he became obsessed with her just from seeing her in the family photographs. But of course, Tina didn't know this, so she kept answering his calls. They kept getting closer until eventually Daniel asked her out to go on a date to the local fair. She agrees. Daniel shows up at her house to meet up for their date. He knocks on the door. Tina answers, and she's like, whoa, you kind of look a lot different than the way that you described yourself on the phone, because I guess on the phone Daniel said that he was blonde, tall, athletic, but then he showed up and he was kind of the complete opposite. And remember, he didn't have parents that cared for him. He didn't really care for himself, so he was always a little bit dirty. His hair was greasy. He was a little bit stinky. Tina was just surprised, but she still decided to go on the date. They're walking around talking when Tina tells Daniel that she just recently lost her mother to cancer, and Daniel is like, whoa, and Tina is like, whoa, and Daniel says, tell me more, and then he starts asking the most out-of-pocket questions like, how much pain was your mom in? How bad did she suffer? What did you feel inside of you when you found out that you no longer had a mother? And he's asking these questions with excitement. There's like a little sparkle in his eyes, and Tina's like, all right, dude, take me home. She goes home with no intentions of ever seeing Daniel again. A few days pass, and Tina and her sister are home alone again, and they're really missing their mom, so they decide to go to the basement and play with a Ouija board to see if they can talk to her. They do that, nothing happens, they put it away, they go to bed. Later that same night, Tina is in her bedroom when she starts hearing tapping on the walls. She runs to her sister's bedroom and she tells her about the tapping. She's freaking out. She's like, did you hear it too? And the sister says, yeah, I heard tapping coming from the walls too. So both girls are freaking out, but then they're like, whoa, maybe it's a sign from mom. Maybe mom is trying to contact us. The tapping on the walls keeps happening throughout the week, into the next week, and then into the next week. By the third week, both of them are like, all right, this is only happening either in the middle of the night or when we're home alone. Now this is getting a little bit excessive. They're getting pretty scared, so they tell their dad, but the tapping never happens when the dad is around, so they can't really prove it to him. So the dad is just like, okay, yeah, girls, sure, whatever. Days go on and things just keep getting weirder because now it's not only the tapping, now things are being taken and moved around. The milk in the fridge seems to disappear, like neither the girls or the father are drinking the milk, yet there's no milk in the fridge. Food in the fridge and the pantry is going missing. Furniture is being moved around. The TV channels are changing by themselves. One time, one of the sisters left the glass and a plate of food out for a second. She came back to it after like leaving it alone for like 2 minutes. The water out of her glass had been drank and the plate of food had disappeared. Like now this was feeling like psychological torment, and the girls start to believe that they may have contacted some sort of evil spirit when they were using the Ouija board. Because now things were getting ridiculous and the girls were so confused and so scared because everything happened while they were either alone or in the middle of the night. And then their dad would come home and they would tell him, but he just always thought that the girls were trying to mess around with him or something. He never thought like, oh, there's a ghost in the house or there's someone in the house. He always just thought the girls were trying to be funny. And then one day the girls are home alone again. They go down to the basement and they find a message written in red on the wall that said, "I'm in your room, come and find me." They were terrified. They run out of their house into their neighbor's house until their dad came home from work. When he did, the girls showed him. The dad went to go check it out, realized that the message was written in tomato sauce and was like, okay, this is a joke. Like he still thought that it was the girls. A few weeks later, the same thing happens again, but this time the message is written upstairs by Tina's bedroom in the hallway and it says, "I'm back, come and find me." They run over to the neighbor's house again. Their dad leaves work and he gets home. He goes to check it out. He's walking around the house and he notices another message written on the walls in red that says, "Marry me." And then he sees a boy standing in the corner. Daniel Aponte was standing in the corner wearing a wedding dress that he stole from a closet, the wedding dress from the mother that is no longer alive. Some reports even state that he had a wig on his head. The dad sees him, tries to run at him. Daniel somehow manages to get away and he runs away. When police officers show up, they find a crawl space where Daniel was hiding, sitting on the ground, curled up, and he was arrested. They also find that from that crawl space that he had been hiding in, there were like passageways and small spaces inside of the walls in the house that led to every single room, and Daniel had also created peepholes behind the walls to be able to look into every single one of the rooms. So he had literally been in their walls for months, watching them and roaming around, scaring the girls and sneaking out to steal food and move furniture and write things on the wall. You can imagine Tina's shock when one, she learned that a boy had been living in their walls for months. He had a whole setup, by the way. There was like a sleeping bag in there amongst other things. But then two, the shock when she realized that it was the weird boy that she had gone on a date with. She was petrified. Daniel Aponte was arrested and held in juvie for 10 months. That was until his birthday when they could change the charges for him to be tried as an adult. When he was moved from juvie to jail in October of 1987, his mother remortgaged her house to be able to pay his $10,000 bail. 2 months later, Daniel Aponte would commit his worst crime yet. Almost immediately after he got home on bail, he went right back into breaking into people's houses. Mid-October, he broke into a house and he stole 2 weapons. And on December 1st of 1987, in the middle of the day, Daniel Aponte walked out of his house, walked back towards the woods behind it. He made his way over to the Gustafsons family house that was about a half a mile away from his. The Gustafsons family consisted of the wife, Priscilla, who was pregnant at the time, her husband, Andrew, and their 2 kids that were aged 5 and 7 years old. Every single person that knew them would describe that family to be the sweetest family ever. They were just the kind of family that were friendly to every single person that they met, and they were loved by so many people. Excuse me. When Daniel broke into their home, he was carrying the stolen weapon, and he walked in to find that only Priscilla was home with her 5-year-old son. He threatened to use the weapon on Priscilla as he guided her to her own bedroom where he would SA her and then use the weapon twice to end her life. He then found her 5-year-old son. He went upstairs to fill up the bathtub in the upstairs bathroom, and he held him underwater until he was gone. Then the 7-year-old little girl got dropped off by the school bus in front of her house. She walked in to find Daniel, and he did the exact same thing to her. Afterwards, Daniel left and went to go to his niece's birthday party. The husband, Andrew, obviously was not home at the time. He was at work, but when he got home around 5 p.m., he walked into the most horrific crime scene. He had been calling Priscilla all afternoon, but of course, she had not answered his calls. So by the time that he got home, he was already concerned, and as you can imagine, his world shattered in 5 minutes. When he got got home and he walked in to find his wife deceased in the bedroom on the bed with a pillow covering her face. Andrew ran out of the house immediately to call the police. He did not look for his kids because he was afraid that he would find them deceased, and he knew that he would not be able to take it. He could hardly manage to keep himself together long enough to call the police after finding his wife, and he knew that if he saw his children like that too, he would never ever recover. Officers arrived and they found the 2 little kids deceased. My heart breaks for Andrew. I have no words. Officers, of course, knew of Daniel LaPlante. They knew that he lived nearby. They knew that he had just gotten out on bail, and they knew that he had a history of breaking into houses. There was also DNA left at the scene, so they immediately set off to go find him. When they found him, he denied everything, of course, but there was more than enough evidence against him. But when they went to go arrest him, he booked it. He ran as fast as he could to the woods behind his house, and there was a massive search for him. But eventually, on December 3rd of 1987, he was found hiding in a dumpster, and he was finally arrested and taken into custody. He was charged with the deaths of Priscilla, her 5-year-old son, her 7-year-old daughter, plus the several charges he was already facing for stalking and living in the house of the Bowen family, plus other charges for other crimes that he committed while he was out on the run. He was 18 years old at the time of his trial. He pled not guilty, but he was found guilty of all charges, and he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. In 2017, he applied to get a reduced sentence, but the judge ruled that he was very clearly not remorseful at all for everything that he had done, so that was denied, and he was a menace in prison. He was the worst. He will not be eligible for parole again until 2032. But I honestly don't think that we will ever see him be released on parole because of how bad his behavior is, but who knows? Yeah. Terrifying. That is all I have for today's video. I'm gonna go before the sun sets and this room goes pitch black, but let me know what your thoughts are on this case. Let me know if you've heard of this before, because the entire time, like, I read about him living in the walls and I was like, oh, that's the crime, right? That's the main thing that he did. No, and then he went on to commit the most horrific of crimes. Anyway, thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
It usually takes a lot to disturb me, but I can fully say that what happened to this man is genuinely so horrifying and alarming that it really does keep me up at night. This is Otto Warmbier, and he was 22 years old when he mysteriously died after being detained for 17 months in North Korea. He went with a tour guide in a group to North Korea in 2015, and not long after, he was detained for something he possibly didn't even do. No one knows exactly what happened to him while he was detained, but it resulted in him returning home in a vegetative state with severe brain trauma and a complete loss of brain tissue. He was now blind and deaf, and his middle row of bottom teeth looked like they had been completely rearranged with a pair of pliers. Doctors say they found no signs of torture, but I am not buying it. But one thing I know for sure is that what this man went through for 17 months before being returned to the US is sinister. So let's talk about it. Otto Warmbier was from Cincinnati, Ohio, and was described as incredibly smart, caring, and hardworking. He was an amazing athlete who graduated as the salutatorian of his high school class. Otto then went on to attend the University of Virginia, where he majored in commerce and economics. He had a lot of really good things going for him, one of which was he was about to go on a semester abroad in Hong Kong. This was really exciting for him, but before he did that, he wanted to go on a vacation, and he didn't know where until he stumbled across Young Pioneer Tours. Young Pioneer Tours is a travel company that specializes in international travel, but they have an unusual slogan. Their slogan is, quote, budget travel to destinations your mother would rather you stayed away from, end quote. After scrolling through their options, in December of 2015, Otto decided to sign up for a 5-day, 4-night tour to North Korea as part of a New Year's party. The tour group said that it was completely safe for US citizens, but the US State Department actually advised against it, and Otto's parents really didn't want him to go, as I'm sure we can all understand why. But this didn't stop Otto, and on December 29th, 2015, he, along with 10 other US citizens within the Young Pioneer Tours group, boarded a plane to Pyongyang. When they arrived to North Korea, Otto and all of the other members of the tour group had their cameras taken away, and all of their phones were searched for any harmful material that could potentially bring harm to the North Korean government. Everyone in the tour group stayed at this hotel, which is known as the Alcatraz of Fun. Otto roomed up with another group member, and everyone seemed to be having a lot of fun. But a few days later, everything would change. After a New Year's Eve party in Pyongyang's main square, the Young Pioneer Tours group went back to their hotel. Some went to the bars to continue drinking, while others just went back to their rooms. Otto's roommate went to a bowling alley, and he later recalled that no one had heard or seen Otto for about 2 hours that night. But at around 4:30 that morning, his roommate went back to their shared room and found Otto sleeping peacefully in his bed. So everything seemed okay. day. The next day, which was January 2nd, 2016, it was time to head home. So everyone in the group began boarding the plane, but out of nowhere, North Korean authorities walked up to Otto, tapped him on the shoulder, and started to take him away. Otto's roommate jokingly said, quote, "Well, we won't be seeing you again," end quote, in which Otto laughed. But little did he know that he was right. He, along with the rest of the tour group, would never see Otto again, and what happened after this has never been explained. After Otto had been taken away, and as the plane was about to take off, officials loudly announced, quote, "Otto is very sick and has been taken to a hospital." End quote. At this point, everyone on the plane thought this was true, so they went back home, leaving Otto behind. When he didn't return home with the rest of the group, Otto's parents knew something was really wrong, but they had no idea what happened to him until late January when the North Korean government confirmed that he had been arrested. This was a shock to everyone, and the only thing North Korean authorities would say is that he was arrested for committing a hostile act against the state. It would take 6 weeks for any more information to come out, and in this time frame, his family and friends back home were in a state of panic, as I'm sure you can imagine. North Korea then went into detail, accusing Otto of stealing a propaganda poster from a restricted area of his hotel at around 2 a.m. on New Year's Day. 1 month later, Otto appeared on TV at a press conference, and it is one of the most jarring things I have ever seen.
"I entirely beg you, people and government of the DPR Korea, for your forgiveness. Please, I have made the worst mistake of my life."
He was very obviously under a lot of stress, but he was crying, looked incredibly pale, and was just very distressed. He then made a speech that shocked everyone. Reading from a script, Otto thanked the North Korean government, quote, "for the opportunity to apologize for my crime, to beg for forgiveness, and to beg for any assistance to save my life." End quote. He then confessed. He said he snuck onto the employee-only restricted floor of his hotel and tried to steal the propaganda poster as a trophy for a Methodist church back home, and for the Z Society, which is a secret society at the University of Virginia that he wanted to join. He said that both were allies to the CIA. Otto said he wanted to do this to harm the work ethic and motivation of the Korean people. But this is where the story starts to get really strange and unnerving. Many people think that this confession Otto made was fake, and then he was forced to lie and say that he did this when he didn't. There were a lot of inconsistencies in his statement, and overall, it just really didn't sound like his words. One reason that people thought that this was a fake confession was because Otto was Jewish, and he had no affiliation with a Methodist church at all. Everyone back home hoped that they would show mercy on Otto, but that was not the case. 2 months after he was arrested, a trial started, and it only lasted 1 hour. During the trial, North Korean authorities presented CCTV footage taken from the hotel the night the poster was stolen, and even though the image is incredibly grainy and you aren't really able to see a face, they claimed this was Otto. This was backed up by Otto's tour guide, who claimed Otto was, in his opinion, definitely the one on the CCTV footage. This, along with his confession, even though some think that it was forced, fingerprint evidence, and witness testimony, Otto was found guilty by the North Korean government. You can see his utter shock at this finding, and he was then sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment and hard labor. This sentence shocked everyone at home, who found it outrageous, and US authorities felt like this was a political move. But in North Korea, damaging or stealing any item with the name or image of a North Korean leader is considered a serious crime. So Otto was now sentenced, and while everyone thought he would now be spending his days in a labor camp, authorities back home were doing everything they could to get him released. It would take over a year, but 17 months later, Otto was officially released and got to go back home to Ohio. And you would think that this would be a happy moment for his family, right? Well, after seeing Otto's condition, that was not the case. According to his family, Otto was wheeled off the plane strapped down in a bed. He was violently jerking and making these really scary howling and inhumane sounds. His head had been shaved and he was now blind and deaf. And he had a huge scar that resembled electrocution on his left foot. If this wasn't disturbing enough, after further examination, it looked like someone had taken a pair of pliers and rearranged his middle bottom row of teeth. The dentist Otto had his entire life confirmed this. His dentist said that Otto always had incredibly straight teeth, but now his bottom 4 middle teeth had been moved backwards toward his tongue, and on top of that, he was just completely missing a tooth. After being taken to a local hospital, Otto was found to be in a vegetative state, and he had been in a coma for the past 17 months. This was shocking news to his family and to US authorities, because not once had anyone in North Korea mentioned that Otto was sick and in a coma. Everyone here thought that for the past 17 months, he had been serving his time in prison and working in labor camps like he was sentenced. But that was not true. He had severe brain trauma and was in what doctors called a state of unresponsive wakefulness. He would occasionally open his eyes and blink, but other than that, he showed no awareness awareness of his environment, and he couldn't intentionally move. He couldn't even recognize his own language. Otto's doctors here in the US received brain scans that were taken in North Korea, and those showed severe damage to his brain. But what caused that damage is still a mystery. According to North Korean authorities and medical staff, Otto had somehow suffered a brain injury and was comatose since the day after his trial in 2016. And due to his state now, it seemed clear to some people that he had been tortured, but North Korea denies this. They say that Otto contracted botulism after his trial, and he fell into a coma after taking a sleeping pill that they gave him. This kind of contradicts everything that had happened. When Otto was taken off the plane, well before he was tried and convicted, North Korean officials told everyone that he was sick when he wasn't, at least not yet. And if this was true, why didn't they say anything sooner? Here is what's strange though. Otto was examined by a doctor once home, and according to them, they found no signs of torture on his body. They say that he fell into a coma after suffering from a lack of blood and oxygen to his brain. How that happened and why, they don't know, but he was denied oxygen for anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes. They did note that his condition was severe and that he suffered an extensive loss of tissue in all regions of his brain. But still, doctors remain adamant that there was no sign of torture, even despite his teeth and huge scar on his foot that resembled electrocution. Doctors found no signs of fractures to his skull or even previous ones that had possibly healed, and scans to his head and neck seemed normal outside of his brain injury. Some doctors suggest that despite Otto returning in this condition, he received good medical care while in North Korea. Sadly, Otto's injuries were so severe that he never regained consciousness, and 1 week after returning home, he died, never getting to tell his side of the story. For reasons unknown, his family requested no autopsy, but a post-mortem examination was done, and from that, the medical examiner said that his cause of death could have been from a blood clot, sepsis, or kidney failure, and if he did have botulism like North Korea said, then a sleeping pill could have caused him to stop breathing if he had been paralyzed from the illness. But another strange twist is that after being examined by a doctor back home, they found no evidence of the botulism illness in Otto's body. This could be due to how long he was detained in North Korea, but it could also mean that he never actually had botulism like they said. The medical examiner officially ruled his manner of death as undetermined and said, quote, "We don't know what happened to him, and that's the bottom line." End quote. So while we still don't know what exactly happened to Otto, there are a few theories. One being that he was tortured, and this theory was backed up when another US prisoner who was also detained at the same time as Otto came forward in 2019. According to him, he saw an American man who he thought was Otto fainting and being dragged across a hallway by North Korean authorities. He said this man's face and head was covered in water, and this has led many people to question if Otto suffered from water torture. This other prisoner also claimed to have suffered from water torture himself at the hands of the North Korean government, so this could be a real possibility. Some think Otto was framed and was truly innocent, while others think that he was guilty for committing the crime that he was sentenced for. Others think that Otto could have attempted to end his own life after being found guilty, but failed, which resulted in the brain injury and coma. North Korea has denied any wrongdoing, and they denied that Otto was ever abused, and they feel that Otto's death was used as a smear campaign against their government. In 2018, Otto's parents filed a lawsuit in the hopes that North Korea would be found responsible for torturing Otto, leading to his death. And the North Korean government was actually found legally liable for his torture and death, even though they still deny it. What's crazy is the fact that Young Pioneer Tours is still around and is still a thing, but after Otto's death, they changed their policy and now don't accept US citizens on their tours. But it's now been 9 years, and whatever happened to Otto on that trip remains a mystery.
This woman has her husband killed by his own best friend, and then she marries that best friend. So her name's Denise, and when all of this starts, she's about 15 years old. She's a cheerleader at this private Christian school in Florida, and while she's there, she starts dating this guy named Mike. He's also 15, he plays football, and you already know how this goes. The cheerleader dates the football player. It's basically in the school handbook by now. And around the same time, Mike's best friend Brian also got a girlfriend. It was this girl named Kathy, and this means that Brian doesn't have to third wheel them anymore. And fast forward like 10 years, they all grow up, they get married, Denise to Mike, and then Brian to Kathy. They all have kids, and from the outside, it is straight out of a Hallmark movie. Until one night in October of 1999, they all decided together to go to this rock concert. At some point, Denise and Brian disappear into the crowd and they start making out. Like full-on grinding and hands everywhere while their spouses are somewhere nearby. And apparently, the kiss was so good that they decided right then and there this was going to be their secret anniversary. The start of their relationship. relationship. And the very next day, Denise sneaks away from work during her lunch break just to go and see Brian again. And before you know it, they're acting like two teenagers who just discovered hormones. They're sneaking around, hooking up in hotel rooms, at the movies, even in church parking lots. And on average, they're doing it like 15 times per week, which works out to be like twice a day. I mean, how do you even have time for that while working a full-time job and raising children? And not only that, but while still being with your whole spouse. But then Denise gets pregnant with her second baby, and even she admits she is not 100% sure who the father is. From that point on, she uses the pregnancy as an excuse to stop sleeping with Mike entirely. First, it's postpartum depression, and then soreness, and then I'm just too tired. Which, listen, those things are 100% valid. Pregnancy is hard, but while she's saying those things to Mike, she is still giving every single ounce of herself to Brian. Now here's where things get even messier. Around this time, Brian and Kathy have a baby too, and suddenly it becomes way harder for Brian and Denise to be sneaking around together. So they start talking about ways they can be together without hiding it. I have an idea. It's called divorce. I feel like people fail to realize that's an option, and Brian actually suggested it, but then Denise shut it down so quick, saying, no, that's against the Bible. But apparently adultery and murder get a pass. Priority list is a little wonky here. Eventually they come up with this disgusting plan that if Mike accidentally dies, then Denise gets $2 million from their life insurance policy. And take a wild guess who sold them that policy? Brian, because of course he was also their life insurance agent. And so they decide that drowning is the best way to end him because it's natural. They literally said, quote, we'll feel better if there's a chance he could survive. It'll be up to God. So on December 16, 2000, Brian calls Mike and says, hey, we should go duck hunting in our favorite spot. And Mike, he's excited because this isn't some out of the blue invite. This is something that they had done together for years. That morning, Mike grabs his gears, puts on his waters, kisses Denise goodbye, and heads out to go meet Brian at the lake. They get in the boat and Brian starts talking like it's any other day. But then he starts steering them like farther and farther away from their usual spot into like this really quiet little corner of the water. And out of nowhere, Brian tells Mike to stand up. And Mike does, because this is his best friend. There's no reason to be suspicious. But the second he gets to his feet, Brian lunges forward and shoves him into the freezing water. But the thing is, Mike's wearing waters. It's that really heavy rubber overalls that duck hunters use. And if you fall into the water with those on, they fill up with water and just drag you straight to the bottom. And this was Brian's plan from the start. Like, this was their quote-unquote natural death. But Mike manages to wiggle out of them, kicks them out of his way, and grabs onto a tree stump. And in that moment, I genuinely think he believed that this was all some type of prank and that Brian was about to reach out and help him. But instead, Brian grabs his shotgun, aims it right at his best friend, and fires. Then he pulls Mike's body back onto the boat, he loads him into his car, and drives home and sleeps next to his wife like nothing happened. The next morning, he drives to Walmart while Mike's body is still in the car, by the way, and he buys a shovel. Then he drives to a remote piece of land and buries Mike where he thinks no one will ever find him. Meanwhile, Denise is at home already playing the grieving wife. She reports Mike as missing, and for the next 44 days, they do this huge search, but even after all that, they found nothing. And the only theory that anyone could come up with is that he must have drowned. And because this is Florida, somebody throws out the idea that maybe he was eaten by an alligator. But as ridiculous as that sounds, it becomes the official theory. And it also didn't help that Denise did not want a criminal investigation, so the case just goes cold. And 6 months later, not 5 years like how Florida law requires, Denise had Mike declared dead and cashes that insurance check. But Mike's mom, Cheryl, was not buying it. She pushed for an investigation to be done, but Denise threatened her, saying that if she kept asking questions, she would never see her granddaughter again. So Cheryl stayed quiet, at least on the outside, and then one day, the bomb drops. Denise marries Brian. I'm disturbed. And Cheryl's like, oh, okay, they definitely did this. And in 2008, she goes against Denise's threats and pushes for that case to be reopened. And detectives actually agreed with Cheryl, saying that there's definitely something weird going on here, but we can't prove it just yet. It takes years, but eventually Denise and Brian's marriage starts to crumble. In the beginning, when they got married, everything was perfect. They got their $1.75 million life insurance payout, they got the house, and they finally had their little happily ever after. But the thing about building a relationship on lies, betrayal, and murder is that the trust was never there to begin with. Because at some point, Brian starts wondering if Denise is going behind his back and talking to the police, and Denise is thinking the same thing. thing. They both know exactly what the other is capable of because they did it together. And the paranoia just keeps on growing until Denise couldn't handle it anymore. She tells him, we're getting a divorce, and Brian completely loses it. He's calling her nonstop, sending her messages, begging her not to go through with it, but Denise does not back down and she files for divorce anyways. So one night he decided to hide in the back seat of her SUV with a loaded weapon, and the moment Denise gets inside the car, he shoves it into her stomach. Denise is frozen and she's thinking, oh my god, this is it. This is where Brian ends my life too. But instead, he makes her promise over and over that she'll never tell anyone what happened to Mike. She obviously agrees, but the second he gets out the car, she drives straight to the police station, which is like the dumbest thing she could have done, but honestly, this entire thing is dumb. She tells officers that Brian kidnapped her, he held her at gunpoint, and she wants a restraining order, like now. Detectives listen to her story and they tell her straight up, we know Brian killed your husband. And Denise is over here trying to play it dumb, saying, oh my god, no, he would never do that. He's a Christian man. And I'm like, girl, be for real. But the officers tell her, look, either you talk or we go ahead and ask Brian his side of the story. So instead of saying anything about Mike, she just goes ahead and brings Brian to court for attempted kidnapping. Like, Denise, what exactly is your plan here? You're just gonna publicly accuse the one man who knows every single dirty detail about what you did and expect him to just not say anything? Somebody reality check her, please. Eventually, Brian gets found guilty, but before he's shipped off to some prison, investigators slide in with this little offer. We'll give you a lighter sentence if you tell us everything about Mike. And Brian basically goes, oh, bet, say less. If I'm going down, you're coming with me, Denise. And because of that confession, Denise is finally arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. She got 30 years in prison and Brian only got 20 because of the plea deal. Mike's body was finally found and his mom, Cheryl, got the justice that she had been fighting for like 2 decades. Not exactly the happiest ending, but at least these two monsters are locked up where they belong. And I really want to know, who do you guys think betrayed Mike the most? Me personally, they could both go to hell, but honestly, Brian not only had one chance of redemption, but 2. He pushed his best friend off and should have had that realization of like, oh shit, what am I doing? But no, he decided to pick up that shotgun and end it for good. What disgusting people. Anyways, I love you guys. Mwah, group hug.
For years, millions of Americans tuned in every single week to watch the Duggar family live their lives on television. Jim, Bob, and Michelle Duggar had 19 children, all with names starting with a J, raised in a household of faith and strict rules. The show was one of TLC's most watched programs of all time, and the family was looked at to be wholesome and relatable. They seemed to the millions of people who watched them like proof that a certain kind of life was possible. But then the truth started to come out and it did not stop. And now members, plural, of the Duggar family are facing very serious, disturbing criminal charges. James Robert Duggar, known to everyone as Jim Bob, was born on July 18th, 1965 in Springdale, Arkansas. He married a woman called Michelle in 1984 when they were both teenagers. Jim Bob was 19, Michelle was only 17. They began their life together in the small, close-knit community in northwestern Arkansas, and they got deeply embedded in the conservative Christian world that would eventually come to define every single thing that they did. Early in their marriage, Michelle fell pregnant, but they unfortunately lost that baby, and she and Jim Bob came to believe that the reason for losing that baby was because of the use of birth control. After consulting their pastor, they made a big decision that would change the trajectory of their lives. They would never, ever, ever use contraception again. They would now, quote, let God decide how many children they had. What followed was 19 children born between 1988 and 2009. I'm not 100% sure if I'm pronouncing every single name correctly. I'm trying my best, but Joshua, Jana, John David, Jill, Jessa, Ginger, Joseph, Josiah, Joanna, Jedida, Jeremiah, Jason, James, Justin, Jackson, Johanna, Jennifer, Jordan, Grace, and finally Josie. And the dynamic of their family was a very close-knit one, but very strict. All of the children were homeschooled and had limited access to TV and the internet. They were also not big on conventional dating. Dating to them looked different, meaning no physical contact before marriage, including kissing, and they pretty much believed that men were above women in every single way. That women belonged completely to their husbands, that daughters belonged completely to their fathers until marriage, that physical discipline of children was not only acceptable but spiritually required, and that a woman's biggest role in life was to please men, essentially. And to their community, they were a model family, but to the outside world, they would become a phenomenon. The Duggar family first appeared on television in September of 2005 in a 1-hour special on the Discovery Health channel titled 14 Children and Pregnant Again. The program introduced America to Jim Bob, his wife Michelle, and their family as they prepared to welcome baby number 15 into the world. The reaction was incredible. Viewers were absolutely fascinated not only by the sheer scale of the family, but everything that they did and the way that they operated. In other words, they gained fans quickly, so then there were follow-up specials on them, and then the audience just kept growing. So much so that in September of 2008, TLC launched 17 Kids and Counting as a full weekly series. They gave them a show of their own that would eventually change from 17 to 18 Kids and Counting, and then 19 Kids and Counting as Michelle continued to birth babies. Over 10 seasons and 229 episodes, the show averaged 3.2 million viewers, making it one of TLC's most watched programs of all time. And the show was just about the family's daily life, the oldest daughter's cooking and caring for the youngest siblings, the relationships, the weddings, the first kisses at the weddings, and the births as the kids got married and started their own families. Jim Bob and Michelle were presented as devoted parents. Their children were polite, helpful, happy. And then the family also became politically active. The eldest son, Josh Duggar, ended up moving to Washington, D.C. to work in politics. Jim Bob ran for Senate in 2002, and for the Arkansas state legislature, the family endorsed political candidates and appeared at campaign events very open about their extremely controversial beliefs. But the point is that they were not just a reality TV family, they kind of transformed to be their own brand. But while America was forming a strong fan base for the Duggar family on television, something deeply troubling had already happened inside of their home, something that Jim Bob and Michelle knew about, dealt with privately, and chose not to disclose to neither law enforcement nor the public for over a decade. In July of 2002, Jim Bob Duggar told the Arkansas State Police in a later report that he had learned that year that his eldest son, Josh, then 14 years old, had expressed extremely disturbing behavior towards a female child, his sister, while she slept. Jim Bob said that he disciplined his son, but he did not call the police, and the behavior did not stop. In March of 2003, he was accused of doing the same thing to other sisters, the same things happening to them, sometimes while they slept, sometimes while they were awake, but on at least 7 different occasions. One saying that she had been standing in the laundry room when Josh walked in and tried to put his hands under her dress. Another particularly disturbing incident involved Josh reading to his then 5-year-old sister as she sat on his lap. He then put his hands in areas that they should never be. She ran out, told her dad. Jim Bob, according to the later police report, then met with church elders and told them what was going on. But still, nobody contacted law enforcement. That same month, Jim Bob and Michelle sent Josh to what they described to be at the time a Christian counseling program in Little Rock. When police later interviewed Michelle about this program, she acknowledged that it was not a legitimate treatment center, saying that Josh had been simply sent away to be with a family friend, where he performed hard physical labor, I guess for 4 months, but he received no professional mental health treatment of any kind. When Josh returned home in July of 2003, Jim Bob and church elders took him to meet with an Arkansas state trooper named Joseph Hutchins, but not because he was in law enforcement. They took him to him because he was strictly a family friend, a personal family friend of the Duggar family. And apparently this state trooper gave Josh what the later police report described to be a very stern talk, but took no official action, filed no report, and made no referral to Child Protective Services. Josh then apologized to the victims, most of which were his sisters, and then that was that. The family considered the matter resolved. Fast forward 4 years to 2007, that state trooper, the family friend Joseph Hutchins, was convicted on CP charges. For that, he is currently serving a 56-year prison sentence. Just an important detail to mention, in my opinion, because the man that Jim Bob Duggar had chosen to give a stern talk to his son turned out to be guilty of disturbing, disgusting behavior himself. Then we get to 2006. The family flies out to be on Oprah Winfrey's show. Everything is going according to plan until production receives an email from a person that is saying, listen, the family is not who you think they are. Josh Duggar has SA'd his little sister amongst other children. The parents know, they're hiding it, and they are never going to let this information be released to the public. Just thought you should know before you have them on your show. Filming is then canceled. Production takes that email to law enforcement. Turns out law enforcement had received a very similar email claiming the same things, but still no charges are filed. Then the Duggar family goes on to sign with TLC for their show to air on TV with absolutely no public knowledge of any of the allegations against them. And like I said, in September of 2008, 17 Kids and Counting premieres on TLC with Josh Duggar as a featured cast member, presenting himself to millions of people to be this devoted Christian husband and soon-to-be father. It would not be until 2015 that the information would be made public. By that point, Josh was married married and with 4 children of his own. In May of 2015, In Touch magazine publishes the police report, the article that detailed everything. The incidents from 2002, 2003, the victims who were his little sisters, the family response, the inadequate program that Josh was sent to, the meeting with the trooper who would be later convicted of CP, and the extremely disturbing allegations against Josh. It all comes out. Within hours, the Duggar family's carefully constructed public image was in deep trouble. Josh Duggar issued a statement that same day, quote, 12 years ago, as a young teenager, I acted inexclusively. I have since then been humbled and humiliated by the horrific nature of my past conduct. I sought forgiveness from those who I had wronged and asked for and received forgiveness from my parents. We spoke with the authorities where I confessed my wrongdoing, and my parents arranged for me and those affected by my actions to receive counseling, end quote. 3 days later, TLC announced that it was pulling all episodes of 19 Kids and Counting from its schedule. Quote, we are deeply saddened and troubled by this heartbreaking situation, and our thoughts and prayers are with the family and victims at this difficult time, end quote. For that statement, TLC faced an immediate and intense backlash, in part because on the night the story broke, the network had been running a marathon of 19 Kids and Counting episodes. Critics were very quick to point out that the network had been profiting from a family that it clearly fully failed to investigate. Jim Bob and Michelle then sit down for an interview with then Fox News anchor Megyn Kelly for an interview that aired in 2 parts. In said interview, they defended their handling of the situation, described Josh's behavior as a dark and difficult time that had ultimately brought them closer to God. And they expressed frustration that the police report had been made public. Michelle said, quote, we had a situation in our home and we handled it. Our children were safe, end quote. The sisters, who were the victims, also got very upset that the information was now made public. They were, too, openly critical about the decision that was made to release the police report. Quote, I couldn't believe what was going on. I said, what right do you have to do this? We're victims. They can't do this to us, end quote. Then Josh's wife makes a statement saying that this information is, yes, shocking, but not to her because she had already known about this. She found out 2 years after their engagement. But she states that Josh has received counseling that changed his life, saying that he is no longer the person who once essayed his little sisters. TLC officially canceled 19 Kids and Counting on July 16th of 2015. However, 5 months later, TLC launched a new show. It was initially titled Jill and Jessa Counting On, and that show was, I guess, created to give Jill and Jessa, Josh's sisters, a platform to tell their stories in the aftermath of Josh's revelations. But within a few episodes, that show basically became what 19 Kids and Counting had been. It pretty much became a show about the entire Duggar family, their courtships, their weddings, and their babies. Josh was not seen on screen, but everyone else remained. Counting On ran for 11 seasons. It made a lot of money, not only for TLC, but also for the Duggar family. In 2018, Jill and her husband Derek left the show and later publicly revealed that none of the adult children from the Duggar family had ever been paid directly for their appearances on it, saying that all the money from TLC flowed to Jim Bob, who controlled the family's finances. This new revelation then opened a new and deeply uncomfortable conversation about the power that Jim Bob wielded over his entire family. And it was then that a lot of conversations started happening of people beginning to ask questions about what the family dynamic was really like. And people of the public felt really confused as to why this family was being portrayed as genuine and wholesome when in reality they seemed to be a family who lived in a system of manipulation and control. But perhaps the biggest shock came in 2021. On the morning of April 29th of 2021, federal agents from Homeland Security Investigations arrived at Wholesale Motor Cars, a used car dealership in Springdale, Arkansas, owned and operated by Josh Duggar. They seized multiple electronic devices and arrested 33-year-old Josh Duggar. He was taken into custody and held without bond. The charges against him were initially sealed. However, very soon after they were unsealed, and it was revealed that Josh Duggar had been charged with 2 federal counts: receiving CSAM material and possessing CSAM material. The material involved children under the age of 12. Josh pleaded not guilty and was released from custody in May. During that time, he stayed with family and friends, a pastor and his wife, while he awaited trial, under the condition that he had no unsupervised contact with minors. The details that emerged from that federal investigation were devastating, to say the least. In a pre-trial hearing, a special agent from the Department of Homeland Security testified that the material found on a computer belonging to Josh Duggar included files that were among the, quote, top 5 worst I have ever had to examine, end quote, in his 11 years on working on similar cases, including videos of children as young as 18 months old. They were described to be way beyond just disturbing, not only CSAM, but also child torture. Josh had used some sort of hidden system on his work computer and a peer-to-peer file sharing program to download and view the material, taking significant measures to conceal his activity from the monitoring software the family used. The material found included, quote, 600 or more images. TLC canceled Counting On in June of 2021, 2 months after Josh's arrest. The network then cut all ties with the Duggar family entirely. Josh Duggar's federal trial began in November of 2021. Over 6 days, 10 witnesses testified. The prosecution's argument clearly showing that Josh had deliberately downloaded and distributed CSAM using that software that he installed on his computer and created a password-protected hidden partition for, specifically to hide his activity. Not only that, but Josh had distributed that material to an undercover law enforcement officer. And what was his defense's argument, you may be wondering? Oh, well, they just said that it wasn't true. They just said that it wasn't him. Their main argument was that someone else must have used Josh's computer. Thankfully, in December of 2021, after less than 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found Josh guilty on both counts. He showed absolutely no visible emotion as the verdict was read, and he was sentenced to 151 months. 12.5 years in federal prison, followed by 20 years of supervised release. His current release date is set for October 2nd, 2032. He will then be 44 years old. And if you think that that is the end of the video, it's not, because in March of 2026, there is another arrest. 31-year-old Joseph Duggar was arrested on March 18th, 2026 and charged with 2 counts, one involving the SA of a victim under 12 years old. He's accused of SAing a 9-year-old girl on multiple times during a family vacation to Panama City Beach, Florida in 2020, quote. Bay County investigators were contacted by a detective regarding a report of past SA. The 14-year-old victim participated in a forensic interview where she disclosed several incidents involving Duggar that occurred during a family vacation in Panama City Beach when she was only 9 years old. According to the Bay County Sheriff's Office, the victim reported that Joseph repeatedly asked her to sit on his lap, sit beside him on a couch, and cover them with a blanket. I think you can put together what he did / tried to do when that was happening. So this girl goes to her dad, tells him what happens. The child's father then confronts Joseph directly about this, and guess what? Joseph admits to it. Not only that, he says that yes, those things happened, even confirming that, quote, his intentions were not pure. Police then had the father call Joseph again, but this time with a detective listening on the line, and then Joseph admits to it a second time. But then he pleads not guilty and he requests a jury trial. So this is a case that's still ongoing. But this is now the second Duggar son in the same family from the same household, raised under the same religious framework, to face serious child SA allegations. But that's still not all, because 2 days after Josh's arrest, 27-year-old Kendra, his wife, was arrested and charged with 4 counts of endangering the welfare of a child and 4 counts of false imprisonment, both in the second degree. Allegedly, when Joseph was arrested, there was a welfare check done on the kids, and it was found allegedly that 2 bedrooms had the locks on the outside of the doors instead of on the inside, suggesting that Kendra, Joseph, or both used those rooms to lock away their kids. They both pleaded not guilty, and these are both still ongoing cases. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that for now. We'll see what happens, but let me know if you guys have heard about this. Let me know if you're keeping up to date on it, and I'm sure I'll make a follow-up video on this. Thank you for spending time with me today. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
I've said it once and I will say it again. Nothing is more disturbing to me than when someone just vanishes into thin air, leaving behind no clues. That's what happened to Sean Ritchie on Halloween night in 2014. He went to a party at a remote farmhouse with a few of his friends, and he was last seen running away into the bogland. What he was running away from, or who he was running away from, is still a mystery. And this is by far one of the most chilling disappearances I've ever come across, so let's talk about it. Sean Ritchie was 20 years old when he mysteriously disappeared on Halloween night in 2014. There's surprisingly not a lot of information about this case online, despite it being over 10 years ago, but here's what we do know. His mom last saw him that night at their home in Fraserburgh, Scotland. He was then spotted on CCTV at a convenience store not far away, and little did anyone know that this would be the last image ever taken of Sean. At around 10 p.m., Sean, along with 5 of his friends and 2 other men, all piled into a white van and made their way to Kersey Hill Farm, which is a remote remote farmhouse in Greenburn, Scotland, where a Halloween party was supposedly going to be taking place. I'm not from there, so bear with me, but from what I gather, this was in the Strichan area close to Aberdeenshire. But this farmhouse is extremely remote, and it's surrounded by flat countryside that's home to a handful of small farms. And from what I can tell, it's a really wet and boggy area. But here's where the story starts to get strange. It's rumored that once the van got close to the farmhouse, the driver got out and started chasing people with an axe. And to clarify, it's never been mentioned if the driver was just a random person or if they were actually friends with Sean. So at this point, the group split into two and they started running, and they both assumed that Sean was with the other party, but that was not the case. Not long after this, two calls from the group were made to police. One asking for them to come out to the farm for help, and the second to cancel that request, saying that everything was actually okay. The call came from this area with the red dot, and this is near where Sean was last seen. And this is what's so confusing about this case. Not one person in the friend group ever said why they all started running. Like I said, it was rumored that the driver started chasing them with an axe, but this was only a rumor. They never confirmed this. But somehow, everyone made it home that night except for Sean. And you'd think that when he was still missing, and when you couldn't get a hold of him, that you'd report him missing to the police, right? Well, that is not what happened. Sean wasn't actually reported missing to the police until 2 days later, and this was by his family after he never came home. His friends very suspiciously never reported him missing, and they never let anyone know what happened that night at the farmhouse. So after the police were notified, a search for him began, involving police, hundreds of volunteers, a mountain rescue team, cadaver dogs, drones, and helicopters. The search radius did seem really small, and I think that's because of it being really boggy. But the area where he was last seen was heavily searched, along with the route they took to get to the farmhouse, which was A981. And I think this is like a highway, or at least one of the major roads connecting all of the surrounding towns. But absolutely nothing was found, and it was like Sean vanished into thin air. And to make matters worse, it was extremely rainy around this time, which made it harder to find any evidence. Then 5 days later, police found his belt, shoes, and his hoodie not far from where he went missing, and this gave everyone some hope that Sean would soon be found too. But that never happened, and no other clue as to what happened to him has ever surfaced, and to this day, Sean remains missing. What's so confusing about this case is how little information we have. The friends and other people at the party that night are reportedly pretty dodgy, and they've never once talked about what happened that night, even though Sean was their friend. Police believe that he just ran into the boglands surrounding the farm and is still out there somewhere. Either that, or he fell into a ditch or body of water somewhere, became stuck, and either drowned or died of exposure. Authorities have found no evidence that Sean has been the victim of a crime, and they've made it pretty clear that they found no evidence of foul play, despite his clothes being found in a field and the fact that he's literally still missing. But Sean's family is not buying that, and they, along with many other people, believe he was murdered that night. According to his dad, Sean owed some money at the time of his disappearance. To who or for how much, I'm not entirely sure, but he feels that Sean could have been killed over a debt. Some people online have pointed out that it would be unusual to be killed over owing money, but it would make more sense to try and scare Sean. Some suggest that that's exactly what happened that night and why everyone took off running from the farmhouse, and that's why everyone has been silent about it ever since. What sucks is that no one knows who was actually at the party, and then another rumor started floating around about how Sean and his friends could have been forced into the white van and then taken to the farm not by their own volition. How someone would manage to force 5 men though, I'm not sure. But this rumor was backed up when someone close to Sean received a Snapchat that fateful night. The Snapchat was of someone inside the van, reportedly joking about having been kidnapped. These are just a couple of rumors and theories that have gone around. And of course, another theory is that Sean died at the farmhouse that night, either accidentally or having been killed. But one thing is for sure, an emergency call was made to the police in the area where Sean was last seen. And the biggest question is what happened to make someone call the police? And what was said in that initial call? Some suspect that Sean died in some sort of accident or possible overdose, and someone at the farm started to call the police for help. But in a panic and not wanting to get in trouble, they decided to cancel the request for help, and they somehow dumped his body in an area that has yet to be found. But this is just a theory, and it has never been proven, and there have been absolutely no suspects in this case ever since. It is just so disturbing to me how, to this day, he has never been found, how he just seemingly vanished. There is a possibility that he's still out there somewhere surrounding the farm, maybe just outside of the initial search radius, and they just haven't found him yet. What's actually crazy is that since his family believes he was murdered, they've obviously been pushing for authorities to investigate deeper, like one would usually do. But I guess they didn't like that, because Sean's mom was actually arrested and convicted for wasting police time. I think that is so cruel. She's literally just trying to find her son, and then she's put through that. It's unbelievable. Sean's family has this Facebook page if you'd like to go and show your support. They deserve answers, and Sean deserves to be found. found. And of course, there is a cash reward for anyone who can help them find their beloved son. But it's now been 11 years, and whatever happened to Sean at the farmhouse that night remains a mystery.
This 3-year-old told the police that he witnessed his father murdering his mother, and yet no one believed him. They thought that he either imagined it or that he had been brainwashed. Years later, however, it would be him who discovered his mother's remains. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Bonnie Haim. In the mid-1980s, teenager Bonnie Lynn Brooks began working at a construction company as an accountant. While here, she would meet Michael Haim. Michael worked at the construction company as a manager, and this company was actually owned by his auntie, Evan. Bonnie and Evan would become very good friends, and soon she began dating Michael. They got married in 1986, and from the outside, they appeared to be a perfect match. Bonnie was described as someone who was quiet and shy, but she was very kind and caring, and she was someone that you could always depend on. Michael was described as a good man who was soft-spoken and could be quite reserved. Bonnie would soon come to learn, however, that was a facade. From early on in their marriage, Michael started to abuse Bonnie. It wouldn't be unheard of for her to come into work with fresh black and blue bruises. On one occasion, Evan would recall Bonnie coming into the office hysterically crying her eyes out after Michael had slammed her hand in the car door. She would be constantly under his surveillance. The married couple lived together and they also worked together, and so Michael was constantly breathing down her neck. Within the office, some of the colleagues would witness the couple getting into arguments and bickering, and Michael's need for control over Bonnie became very apparent. Sometimes when Bonnie was at work and he wasn't, he would ring up the office several times a day to make sure that she was still there, and he would always be checking the miles on her car. After giving birth to their son Aaron in 1989, Bonnie really started to feel trapped. She felt like she couldn't leave Michael, but she needed to, and so she started planning to escape him. She did not want her son to be raised in a volatile home with an angry man. The first thing that Bonnie did was open up her own secret bank account, and every spare penny that she had went into that account. Michael had complete control over both his money and her money through a bank account that he controlled. So if Bonnie ever tried to withdraw or use any of the money, he would see immediately. She would spend weeks, if not months, building up money in this secret bank account, up until one day, Michael realised what she was doing. He was looking through the paperwork on her desk when he came across one of the bank statements from her secret bank account, and upon finding this, he absolutely flipped. He demanded that Bonnie send him all of the money and close the account, which out of fear, she did. But she wasn't ready to give up. She was more determined now than ever that she needed to get out. She enlisted the help of a friend that she trusted, and she started giving this person every bit of spare cash that she had to save up for her for when she was ready to leave. She would actually find a lovely little apartment for her and Aaron on the other side of the town, which she reserved. She put his name down at a nearby nursery, so now all she needed to do was wait for the perfect time to escape. And it was coming up. Michael was scheduled to be going out of town on a work trip, and Bonnie decided that is when she was going to do it. However, 23-year-old Bonnie would disappear before she got the chance to do so. On the 6th of January 1993, Bonnie returned back to her home in Jacksonville, Florida at around about 7:30 p.m. Upon her arriving back home, she and Michael got into a ferocious fight. We know this because following the fight, she actually rang up Evan. Bonnie was actually supposed to be going over to her house that night to help her plan a baby shower for another one of their friends, but after this big fight, she couldn't go. She would assure Evan that she was fine and that she would fill her in with all of the details at work the next day. Only the next day, Bonnie didn't show. Alongside Bonnie not turning up, Michael would ring in sick and alarm bells started ringing for Evan. She was sort of aware on a surface level of what was going on between the two, of the abuse, but not the full extent. One thing that she was sure of though was that Bonnie would never leave Aaron. So when Michael told her that Bonnie had jumped in the car in the middle of the night and took off and didn't come back, that was very suspicious for Evan. Later that day, Bonnie's handbag along with her purse, which still had her pocketbook, her ID and cash inside, was discovered inside of a dumpster. Her car would also be found in a long stay car park nearby the airport. However, when police arrived to have a look at it, something wasn't right. Bonnie was only a petite woman, she was only 5'3". However, when they found this car, the seat was pushed so far back that it would have been impossible for Bonnie to have driven this car. Her feet wouldn't have touched the pedals. And there, in the driver's side footwell, clear as day, was a shoe print. This shoe print was a pretty much perfect match to Michael's shoe size, and the tread on the shoe, again, perfectly matched a running shoe that Michael owned. Aaron would be interviewed by child psychologists, and what he told them was nothing short of chilling. At 3-year-old, he said, quote, "Daddy hurt her. Daddy shot Mommy. Daddy put her in timeout." This is something that Aaron would repeat over and over, and he even created drawings alluding to it, drawing a man holding a gun. But because of his young age, not much stock was put into the statement. In fact, some of Michael's family who did believe that Bonnie had ran away said that Bonnie's family had been brainwashing the 3-year-old. Aaron would be removed from Michael's care after it was learned that he had been abusing Bonnie, and Aaron was deemed at high risk of abuse by the hands of his father. He would be adopted by Bonnie's auntie and uncle and would take on their family name of Fraser. Over the years, he continued to think about his mother. When he was 6, he sat down with a social worker, and this social worker read something out that Aaron had independently wrote. He had written, quote, "My dad killed my mom. He buried my mom. We digged it. The hole." In 2014, a now 25-year-old Aaron was back at the family home. Michael still owned it, but he no longer lived there. He started doing some renovations in the back garden, pulling up the grass, pulling up concrete, when he noticed something that was buried underneath some concrete. Initially, he thought it was a coconut because of its round shape. He then picked it up to inspect it further and noticed eye sockets and teeth. He was holding not just a human skull, but the skull of his own mother. Bonnie's full remains would be recovered from the back garden along with a gun. In January 1993, Michael would shoot Bonnie and then literally buried her body in the back garden and got away with it for over 20 years. How police and investigators missed newly disturbed land in the back garden, I'll never understand. Michael Haim would go on to be charged and convicted of the murder of Bonnie Haim, and for this, he received a sentence of life imprisonment.
This high school principal essayed his students for over 40 years. Neil Foden grew up in Wales. He got married, he had children, he started working as a teacher, and he had this reputation of being this great family man and this great teacher. But that was as far away from the truth as possible. When he started his teaching career in the 80s, Neil was cruel, he was strict, and he would physically abuse his male students in class. Like, if he didn't like one of his male students, he would just get up and hit them or choke them in the middle of class. And I didn't grow up in the 80s, but I have to assume that that wasn't normal or acceptable at all, but somehow he got away with it. He was physically harming his male students, but with his female students, he would harass them and be extremely inappropriate towards them. He would stare at their bodies very blatantly, and then he would make really inappropriate comments. He would always compliment them, and then he would slowly escalate where now he would be touching his underage female students in inappropriate places, but he would always just make it seem like it was an accident. And somehow Neil was able to trick this entire school district into thinking that he was a good man and a good educator because he was promoted to the head teacher, which is the UK equivalent of like the principal in the United States. And he would constantly escalate the abuse towards his young underage female students. It started as lingering stares and creepy comments and then inappropriate touching, and then it was full on SA. And these are very, very young girls between the ages of 13 and 15 years old. This head teacher is a PDF file, and somehow he got away with it for over 40 years. While also being a PDF file and a child abuser, Neil was also just a terrible boss, and he would mistreat and bully his staff, more specifically the female staff. And there was one female staff member that reported that Neil put his hands down her pants one day in school. Neil would also hire other abusers and PDF files to work as teachers at his school. One of the teachers that Neil hired was actually fired by the school board after it was found out that he was stalking and harassing the underage female students in school, out of school, and online. And this teacher actually commented on one of these underage students' social media posts, telling her how beautiful she was and how he wished wished that he was 34 years younger. Neil Foden would purposefully target students that came from not the greatest homes or had a really troubled upbringing because he thought that if these students were to report him, that they would not be believed. And any allegations that were made against him were just swept under the rug by the school board. Not only was Neil Foden a complete monster, but he was an absolute PR nightmare for the school district. He was constantly making headlines even before he was arrested for just being a terrible person. A video went viral online that another student filmed and posted of Neil Foden as the school's principal choking out one of the young underage male students. Neil also made headlines after he said that he did not want to feed any of his students that were from lower incomes, and this was during the pandemic. Neil would also often look up and watch CSAM in his office during school hours. Neil is now in his 60s and he's gotten away with all of this abuse for 40 years, and he has now escalated his abuse to full-on assault and SA. There are multiple victims of Neil Foden and none of their identities have been made public. There was one student that was between the ages of 13 and 15 years old. Neil was in his 60s and he would drive her home from school and he would assault her and SA her in his car and in motel rooms. Sometimes the students that Neil would SA, they would say no, but he did not care and he just kept getting away with it over and over and over again. Same exact thing happened when Neil Foden was 65 years old with yet another underage female student that was under the age of 16, but this time this girl did come forward and this time she was believed. This very young, very brave student went to one of her teachers that she trusted with everything and told her everything that the head teacher was doing to her. She had evidence to back up her claims. She had been storing text messages, photos, and videos of the 65-year-old head teacher Neil Foden SAing her. And once 65-year-old Neil Foden was finally reported to the police with evidence, they had no choice but to arrest him. And on September 6, 2023, police arrived at the school and they arrested Neil at the school and they took him out in handcuffs in front of staffs and students and everything. And after he was arrested, multiple other of his victims over the past 4 decades, over 40 years, started to come forward, but it's extremely likely that there's even more victims of Neil Foden's out there. And this entire time that he was doing this to children that he was supposed to be helping and looking after and educating, Neil was married with children. And 40 years later, his wife discovered what a monster she was married to. Neil Foden would, of course, plead not guilty despite all of the evidence and victim testimonies against him. And he actually got on the stand during his trial and accused all of them of lying. Neil was found guilty on 19 separate charges, which included 12 counts of SA of a child, 2 counts of SA of a child while in a position of trust, and he was found in possession of CSAM, including a bunch of other charges. And he was sentenced to only 17 years in prison, and with good behavior, he could be out in only 12 years. This is absolutely such a frustrating case, how he was able to get away with this for 40 years. 40 years. So interested to hear all your thoughts and opinions in the comments. While you're there, please always remember to be respectful for all the victims in today's case. And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that we cover this case. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.